Hey y'all, my name's Scott. I am the face behind McKenna Scrollcraft. You can find me on Facebook at McKenna Scrollcraft, or you can find me on Instagram at smckenart. That's my username there. It's at smckenart. If you check those out, you'll see some behind the scenes work. You'll see some finished pieces. There's some pretty cool stuff on there. I suggest you check that out. And what we're doing here today is doing an inaugural video for YouTube. I get asked a lot about my methods behind how I do stuff, how I prep, how I cut, and how I design the patterns. So I plan on doing a few tutorials on that. But today we're going to focus on prepping the wood for doing the cut. So what we're going to start with today is I have some pre-cut birch ply, 1/4 inch thick. It's pre-cut. My design I did, it was 11 by 14, so these are cut at about 11 3/4 and 14 3/4, so it'll fit and have a little bit of a border around it. And my pattern, I held a vote on Instagram of a couple of patterns that I drew up, and this was the winner, the big winner. This is the Stranahan House, which is right here in South Florida. It's a historic house downtown Fort Lauderdale, built in 1901. It's still standing right now. You can go take some tours of it. It's pretty cool insight on how life was lived here in Florida in the turn of the century. So it's definitely something worth checking out. So I'm going to double stack this piece, which means I'm going to have two pieces of the ply stock. And let's make sure you guys can see that. So you want to make sure the pattern's the right size and everything. There's a couple of ways to print out the pattern the size that you want. I know a lot of people use Rapid Resizer, but what I did with this is I use Microsoft Paint, and when you print it, you can print the size, and it'll print a poster on multiple sheets of paper, and you can just kind of tape them together. So that's how I did this one. And I drew up this pattern myself. At some point I will do a tutorial on how I design my patterns, but today we'll focus on having to get this all ready. So what we're gonna do is you gotta stack these pieces of wood. You gotta make, the closer they are together size-wise, the easier it's gonna be. If you're cutting two different size pieces, you run the risk of one moving around. So what I like to do is I like wood with a pretty nice grain on it. You can see that both these pieces of stock have pretty aggressive grains on it, and it's gonna look really good. Once it's all cut and sanded and oiled, that's really gonna pop. So what I like to do is take the pattern, kind of matched up with the pattern of the grain. You know, with this particular pattern, I'm not terribly concerned with it, but there's some patterns that I cut out that you'll look at the grain and you think, man, this piece would look good if it was sitting right here, like around the grain, so the grain really works with it. But this one's pretty symmetrical, so I'm not going to be too concerned with the look of the grain on that one. So, all right, we're gonna get these lined up. I like to use blue painter's tape. It seems like we're always doing home renovations, so something that's pretty readily available. Just kind of tape half of it around there. Make sure everything's all lined up. just gonna wanna make sure it's nice and tight. And you're just gonna wanna go around all four sides with it. And so that should hold the boards in place while you're cutting. I mean, there's no movement whatsoever. I'm trying to slide those around. So that's how I like to do a stack cut. If you're not doing a stack cut, you don't really have to tape all around the edges like that, but in this case you do. And I've seen people use double-sided tape or something. This seems like the most effective possible way for me to do it. I've tried a couple of things. I mean, I'm no professional, but this is what I find works the best. So this is what we're going to work with today. So next, we're going to continue with the blue tape. I know some people like to use contact paper. I mean, contact paper is probably ideal. But like I said, I have blue painter's tape constantly around, so that's just what I use. There's not much of a difference. It's a little more work using the blue painter's tape, just because you have to keep putting strips down, but I mean, it works. All right, so this is all taped up. You gotta make sure that it's nice and flat with no bubbles or nothing that's gonna compromise the pattern once the pattern's down. So now it's time to apply the pattern. Take a nice look, make sure all the margins are gonna be even. And then we're going to use spray adhesive. There's no right or wrong spray adhesive. You just want to make sure it's sticky and the pattern stays in position. So, this stuff can be pretty messy, so you just want to be careful with it. All right, so that's all stuck up. Check the centering. That looks pretty good. Like I mentioned before, you really don't want any air bubbles or anything like that. Want to make sure that it's completely stuck, because you don't want to be cutting, especially a piece of fretwork like this, you don't want to be cutting over here and have the paper just start to fold up, and then you just lose where you're cutting. So you want to make sure that the spray glue is nice and even, nice and flat, just like that. There we go. All ready to go. So that's looking pretty good. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna move on to drilling pilot holes. We have a 1/16 drill bit. That's the smallest drill bit that you typically get in a drill bit set. But if you look carefully, this drill bit's a lot bigger than a lot of these cutouts that I'm gonna have to cut out. So what I'm gonna have to do is use what's called a micro bit. It still looks like a regular drill bit. And here's the 1/16 to compare size. but this one's much smaller. This particular one's a 1 millimeter, and this 1/16 measures out to about 1.6 millimeters. I know they make these down to 7/10 of a millimeter, which is 70% or 30% smaller than this. So those get really, really small. Problem is, your standard drill bit, the chuck, it doesn't fit in there. So you're gonna need to get an adapter for the micro bits. And then that will fit into a standard drill bit chuck. So a couple things on drilling these pilot holes out. What I like to do is I take some scrap, put it down behind it, because that'll reduce the amount of blowout on the back of it. See? Super clean cut right there. And if I don't use it, you can see it's a little more flaked on the sides. And the problem with that is the little splinters that it causes will go back into the hole. It's gonna be impossible to see when you try to feed your blade in. It's gonna get jammed up in there. So that's why I always use something behind it. Also, what it can cause is if you have some real tight cuts together, if you have a couple of splinters that are real close to each other while you're cutting it with the blade, it could blow out on the back side and the piece could break off. So it's real important to have something behind it while you're drilling these holes. And also one other thing is, a lot of people use a drill press. That's a real easy way to get a nice 90-degree, just straight down pilot hole. I did also forget to mention there's about 440 to 450 holes that I'm gonna have to drill in this one. It's gonna be a while. I did also forget to mention there's about 440 to 450 holes that I'm gonna have to drill in this one. It's gonna be a while. All right, so I think you guys get the idea with that. I'm not gonna put you through any more of that. So, I got all these holes drilled out. They are pretty small. They're gonna be pretty hard to see when you're actually sitting at the saw, so I'll show you a couple of tricks on how to make the life a little easier for you while you're cutting. What I like to do is I like to take a little bit of fire. Singe around the openings. What that's going to do is going to clean up a little bit of the fuzzies that were caused by the drill bits. And you can see it a little bit better there. It makes the holes a little bit darker. When you're trying to peek underneath the board to feed the blade through, it's a little bit easier to see. Hit it with a little 120 grit sandpaper. And they are pretty small holes, but they're gonna be pretty easy to see for feeding the blade through. So that'll help me when I start cutting it out. So essentially, once I like to get all the holes cut out beforehand, or at least as much as I can, because I get kind of frustrated if I start cutting and I gotta stop and start to drill some holes out. So once I get going, I like to just keep going. So I like to drill as many pilot holes as possible before I even start cutting. So once this video wraps up, I'm gonna sit here. I'm gonna still drill for about an hour and a half. So, I mean, pretty much to sum everything up, this is pretty applicable for any type of scroll saw work. It doesn't have to be fret work. I mean, this is kind of just what I do. I like the smaller cuts. I like the more complicated stuff, but in retrospect, this will work for any, you could be cutting letters, shapes, compound cuts, whatever you're doing. This pattern mounting method is pretty applicable for all of that. That's kind of why I wanted to go over this with y'all today, give you a good idea. So, like I said, patterns all mounted, pilot holes drilled, ready to go to the saw. That would be a whole nother thing. Like I said, I'd like to do a couple more tutorials because I like to draw a lot of my own patterns, and I know a lot of people ask how I draw patterns, specifically how do you turn a photograph into a pattern. I know people really love to do portraits of loved ones, and I can show y'all how to get some photographs, turn them into patterns, but that will be in the future on this channel. And along with some cutting videos, if you have any comments, questions, stuff you'd like to see, please feel free, leave it in the comment section. I will be happy to answer any questions. I would entertain any ideas for any future videos, so it's much appreciated. Thank y'all. Have a blessed night. Thank you.